of Macedon. We're continuing the road to true, chapter 5 from part 1. The Macedonians, poor in coined money, were also weak in trade. Out of Asia, with the ever-increasing flow of coins, precious metals, ivory, alabaster, onyx, and rarest stones, came traders and slip dealers in fleets of ships westward bound. Out of the Greek peninsula passed a constant stream of emigrants, goldsmiths, vase painters, settlers, vagabonds, doctors, and musicians, eastward bound towards the wealth in Asia. Trade had mounted with each post-war generation, and the peninsula of Asia Minor now became the junction of the new trade routes from Tura to Sardis, from Syracuse and Carthage in the west. Industrialized and commercialized, the Greek cities now imported their grain and timber and metal, serving in great clearinghouses of trade, dealing increasingly with money. But the trade routes did not enter the Macedonian mountains. The Macedonian treasury had no store of bullion, although Philip had gained for his people a strip of coast with seaports. They had no fleet, nor could Philip make these agriculturalists into traders. The growing prosperity of the Mediterranean world had not touched the Macedonian highlands. It would be necessary for the Macedonians to go and possess themselves of the wealth of the Asiatic coast. So urged Harpalus, the sickly peasant's son, who had become fascinated by the possibilities of coined money, and Alexander understood those possibilities. He could solve problems of economy more quickly than most men could think about them. Many fears held him back from the venture. Distrusting his own ability profoundly, he shrank from the putting himself at the head of 30,000 men. When he passed the groves of Pella out to the shrine that had served once to measure a run for him, he watched the hard line of the distant sea, hostile and unknowable. When his glance touched the wording on the shrine, "I am an immortal god, mortal no more," his imagination conjured up the distant, antagonistic gods of Asia. Well, the so-called gods. Do you really become a god? But maybe you just don't become separate from them in what you're doing. You're not. He had no one to advise him. Rather, he had too many advising him. He always had behind him in the halls of Pella's residence. He felt the ghost of Cleopatra's murdered child, and his cousin Amantas, being Wembley and the Tumbly, must eat soon. Until the morning, when Parmenio and Philotas walked with him out to the shrine, urging again that he must give his consent before the expedition could start. Alexander listened, saying nothing, holding his head aslant. "With the rising of the star Arcturus," he said at last, "we will march to Asia. You have the plans, carry them out." When they left him to hurry back to the palace with the news, he stayed to look out at the line of the sea. Hostile it might indeed be, but beyond it, far to the east, he might find the Panicetus. Aristotle opposed this, and during the last of that winter Alexander sat much with the Stagirite, who was then at work upon his politics. The philosopher, who was to become the criterion of human thought for many centuries, advised the young captain general of Hellas to limit his activity to Macedon. And Alexander in particular is one of the figures that the Bible would not be what it is today if it were not for Aristotle. Here Alexander could control events. Here Alexander's privileged class of noblemen could exist in security. And my stomach's feeling insecure, but it will be secure soon. Maintained by the peasant classes, while it educated itself, and Aristotle had reason to know the ignorance of the mass of the Macedonians. Even Plato, in the Republic, had assumed that only a protected few could reach the heights in human endeavor. The ideal state must be like a garden, sheltered to allow the growth of the finest plants. This was the qualitative argument, and Aristotle pressed it because his own standards were so high. If only a few could be enlightened by exact knowledge of their purpose in life, still that few could govern the mass of the ignorant. Sort of connecting to the Platonic philosopher king idea. Do you have to have a philosopher king to produce the right society? Or does the right society produce a philosopher king? I think it can go both ways. But either way, I don't think people have the excuse. Perhaps there existed no world soul towards which Plato's speculation had tended, yet surely there existed within space the immovable mover, the directing source of energy. Toward that forever stable source, human thought should be turned. Hence, circumambulations and all that. Sitting on the bench under the stone nymphs, Aristotle prodded the damp earth with his staff. We must find the good for which life exists on this earth of ours, he lisped. Blinking his eyes, overstrained with work, he relaxed. A smile moving the wrinkles of his set face. We can grow good fruit trees in this soil, within this garden, even if the tree of life does not grow here. Worried, his mind encompassed by the ever-growing multitude of notes that he kept upon a half-dozen sciences, his words confused when he tried to explain the greater mysteries towards which he labored, his notes on the metaphysical being poorly written compared to his treatise on physics. The Stagirite gave voice to his fears. This garden in which they sat, the mountains of Macedon, the narrow seas around this land, could be no more than one small corner of the great oikumene. The limits of habitable land might stretch for vastly greater distances than philosophers had supposed. Around the globe of the earth, those distances might be peopled with barbarian hordes unseen as yet by Greek eyes. If Alexander had half the manpower of Macedon eastward, the voyagers might be swallowed up, and these multitudes are lost in the vast distances still unmapped. Perhaps in speaking against the departed overseas, Aristotle may have been influenced by his knowledge of Alexander's heredity, for Olympias showed evidence of incipient mania, being never at ease unless she dominated those around her. Well, a malignant narcissist, obviously. And Philip, a drunkard, had sired one idiot. Alexander, at 20 years of age, still showed restlessness in meeting ordinary people and a tendency to escape into a dream world of his own. Stubbornly, the captain general of Hellas refused to change his decision about the expedition. Aristotle himself had admitted that men, like animals, could alter with their physical surroundings. Why then could not Macedonians develop in this way into a kindlier land? The Greeks had extended to the east by sending out colonies. Why could not cities be built on more fertile hillsides than the bleak slopes of Pella? By Macedonians? Yes. Aristotle shook his head curtly. There is no Macedonian people as yet. Your father has created the idea of Macedon. Around that idea, out of tribes, he has formed an army. Without the army, there is no Macedon. He made conquests. Yes, but he failed to administer them properly. The nation he imagined has not yet evolved. The laws of such evolution, Aristotle held, were inexorable and not man-made. Men could not hunt happiness as if it were a winged bird. Yet mariners seeking land and men crossing a desert guide themselves by the flight of birds, Alexander laughed. With the first warmth of the sun at the rising of Arcturus, he felt an overmastering desire to start this journey that had been made by Argonauts and Achaeans before him, toward the rising sun, seeking something better than their old homes, whether gold or glory, our new land of nights. He read himself to sleep with the true tale and the shining loveliness of Helen. Small blame to the Trojans. The Trojans, is it Trojans? For that such a woman, they long time suffered hardship. For she was marvelous, like to an immortal goddess to look upon. Well, a lot of the ideas of goddesses are just exaggerations and exaggerations about women until you finally end up with something, oh, no woman could possibly live up to that. Same thing with animal deities and plant deities and that sort of thing. One actually sees and places the development of some of these things. Perhaps, but the lemma was skeptical about the expedition. But men go on questing for immortal beauty in women, and they are snared by the bright-eyed girls in a garden. He checked himself, remembering a Scythian girl in a garden. At least, Euripides knew that much. What did he say of Helen? Something about joy. Died beside the stream of True. For the phantom of a face and the shadow of a name. He could not change Alexander's mind, and it worried him, because it seemed as if Alexander was thinking of the beauty that had set Helen apart from other women, and not of finding a second Helen. It was a dangerous thing to have preying on your mind. You could not resurrect a ghost, at least. But the lemma comforted himself. We are not launching 1,000 ships. We haven't got them. St. Paul in the Bible is kind of the same way. So something happened with a woman, and he was like, having agreed to go, Alexander surprised the staff officers by examining and testing all equipment. His imagination, it seemed, probed into everything that might happen to the army. He studied the journal of Herodotus and the world plan of Hecataeus, questioned insatiably the spies who had been over the roads in Asia, trying to picture the actual lands that lay ahead. He pondered details endlessly, looking over Diodes's new machines. He tried the weight of the long ladders that the engineer had mounted on 2 sets of wheels, and all the heavy ropes and light cords neatly coiled for packaging. Such ladders, Alexander thought, could not be moved over streams easily. Diodes would have to do without them, and make new ones when necessary. The temperamental engineer dashed the sweat from his chin and roared, "So I am to conjure up a forest of such fine seasoned wood when you call. Diodes, bring ladders. I am about to sow acorns and grow oaks, all in a breath. When the trumpet." "You can knot the ropes together," Alexander, who had been studying the cordage, said mildly. "Yes, Diodes can make ladders and cords, and they can be carried easily." The engineer hated to lose his ladders, and I suppose he breathed ominously. "You can make ropes climb a wall, like a snake." "No," Alexander chuckled, "but you can." Nevertheless, he instructed Aristander, the seer, to be ready to go with the expedition. But the lemma was to command a brigade, and Alexander added strange figures to the army. 2 surveyors who were to plot each day's march, a mineralogist, a weather expert, and scientist who were to keep record of all animal and plant life. Alexander planned to keep his own journal of the trip and asked Ptolemy if he would not like to do the same, as if the son of Arisone complained. He were taking the academy along. Not one woman to go, mind you, but a plenty of bigwigs, musicians, and bug hunters, not to mention the doctors. It seemed to the veteran Macedonians, if this was to be more than an exploring adventure, than an invasion. Who had ever heard of a general keeping a daily journal? Moreover, their captain general insisted on preparing for a year's absence or more. He checked over the personal means of the high officers and companions and offered crown lands. He had no money to those who needed help. Among them was Perdiccas, now recovered from the wound. "But what are you keeping for yourself?" asked that experienced trooper. "My chances." Perdiccas thought that over and said he would take his chances with Alexander. He had noticed with the others, that the erratic and inexperienced Alexander, having announced that he would give all orders, had assumed responsibility for all details. At the same time, he freed himself from one dominating influence. When Olympias, who was to be left in Pella under the unimaginative care of Antipater, stormed at him for his recklessness in giving away the family lands to powerful officers, "You're making them equal of kings." He would not listen to her. When she wept then, working herself into a spasm of self-pity, he spoke suddenly, harshly, "I think I've paid rent enough for the time in your womb." Astonished, Olympias fell silent, drying her tears. "My letters will follow you," she assured him, "wherever you go." At the rising of the star Arcturus, in that year 442 of the Olympiad, the Macedonian army set out on the king's way towards the Dardanelles. Alexander walked in the column in the dust with the black horse, but Cephalus led behind him. He never came back. And book 2 gives us some, gives us sort of a map to work with. So what's on the map? The Tigris, the Euphrates, Arabia. That's supposed to be the mosque at the masjid in Medina. Yeah, that doesn't make sense. Beirut, Tarsus, Isis, a high plateau. Oh, what? No, Orbella. No, okay, maybe that's not. Mount Hermon, Sidon, Jerusalem, Tyre, Gaza, Alexandria, Memphis. Okay, it's... This map kind of looks, a lot of maps aren't entirely the most easy thing to read in terms of accuracy, but